Picture this: two ordinary college students, no religious upbringing, no faith background whatsoever, and then one unexpected conversation that changes everything. Today, our guests will share how a single moment completely redirected their lives and led them to a ministry among Hispanics that they never would have imagined.
Hello and welcome to another episode of To the Ends of the Earth, a CMML podcast. This is episode 1 of season 2. We are so excited that we are back for another season.
We are thrilled to be here. Aaron, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling really, really well.
Great.
Feeling ready for another season. We had great feedback about season 1 and encouragement to do another. So here we are, and we have some very special guests here to kick off the season.
That's right. Bard and Pam Pillette are with us. Their story starts in Costa Rica, where they went in 1979 to study Spanish. And from there, the year afterwards, they went to Mexico and began what they thought was going to be a lifetime of missions in central Mexico, ministering to different cities, and preaching the gospel and making disciples, and also training leaders as they established churches in different places. CMML has had the joy of serving them since 2001, and they are commended by Willamette Bible Chapel in Eugene, Oregon. Welcome, Bard and Pam.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, so glad to have you. Before we begin, Bard, your first name. This podcast is all about storytelling. And so we have very high hopes with your name being Bard, which is a storyteller by trade. We're really excited to have you here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's start pre-ministry. Were you both raised in a Christian home?
No.
No.
My dad was a veteran from World War II. When he got back, he was in the hospital for a year, and then became a truck driver for a lumber company. And my mother had just finished college, and she encouraged him to go to college. So they became school teachers, both of them, and they ended up teaching over in the island of Guam. And it's a long story about how they got there, but my mother's a real social type person, a lot of adventure. And so they ended up accepting a 2-year contract in the island of Guam. And so they were school teachers, and they had their whole social life was with all sorts of international people and school teachers, and a lot of them I think were maybe kind of rough living people because they looked to Guam to kind of break away from the United States, and drinking was just a big part. Partying, they loved partying, and there was no Bible in the home. Never went to church. To them, the Bible was myth, and we just never even. I don't ever remember meeting a Christian in my youth. And so that was my mindset. When I was ready to go to college, I left the island of Guam and went to the University of Oregon, kind of thinking, well, this is my great chance to break away from my family, my parents, and 6,000 miles away. And it was there that, and I had always gotten very good grades. Obviously, school teachers expect their kids to get good grades. And I was a good student, but my grades were horrible. And in part because, well, there's various reasons, but a lot of partying and a lot of social things, a lot of dances, sports. I was involved in sports, and I lived in a fraternity-like thing. It was really a co-op for guys on scholarships, 60 guys in a house with a house mother. It was just like a fraternity, a Greek fraternity, but it wasn't a Greek fraternity. And it was there towards the end of the first year, towards the end of the second term, that I was feeling down about my life. Things just weren't turning out. I had no moral rudder in my life, no way of dealing with things. I had no relatives, no friends there, just totally away from everything that was my life. And this fellow that I knew, but we weren't really great friends, came into the room, my study room, and just began a conversation with
Okay,
me.
let's just stop right there. This is amazing. These folks have been missionaries all of their lives, and yet you're hearing this background, and it's not what our audience would automatically think of as like, oh, these people are headed to the mission field.
Right.
So far,
Yeah.
the story is, has left us hanging here. So,
Yeah. And it's a great note to be taken from our audience that God uses all backstories to bring glory to him down the road. And so I think a lot of people probably who maybe have similar stories where they weren't exposed to the Bible, let alone just missionaries in their upbringing, may feel like, I probably can't be a missionary because I didn't start out right, or I didn't have a great beginning, and I have too much baggage, things like that. So this is so encouraging to hear, you know what? God uses broken people and uses their stories to bring honor to him. So carry on.
Well, I didn't know why he was there at the beginning. He didn't come saying, or he didn't even invite me to a Bible study or to church or anything. He just started talking, well, what do you really want to do? And I was saying, well, probably work for the Forest Service because that's what my dad did during the summers. He was in college to help support the family. He was there on the GI Bill at college. And so I was just leaning that way, and I was kind of like, well, and there, you don't have to deal with people. You cut down trees and clear trails, and I wasn't getting along. I was in fights, a troubled life basically, and he just started the conversation that way and moved into telling me about Christ. And quite frankly, I don't remember all of what he said, but I was. I'd never heard anyone talk to me about Christ. I'd never read the Bible. I had no idea where he was going with this, but I didn't really. At the beginning, I was a little uncomfortable. Like I'm not looking for this. I mean, why is this coming on? But towards the end, he was ready to leave the room, and as he was getting up to leave the room, I just felt overwhelmed with this desire to ask Christ to do something with my life. Wow. And I mean, it's kind of a strange thing to have no background to say, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I shut the door, he left, and I immediately, for the first time in my life, tried to pray. I don't know how to pray. I just, in the best way I could, said, I need help, and I think this is what I need. This is true. Please come into my life. Please help me to stop being who I am. And, and somehow maybe he said something about confessing sins. So I started to confess sins, and I went on, I don't know, for 5 minutes or more. And I finally reached the point where I said, well, I mean, this is good enough. I think you get the idea. And
you get the idea.
Well, and he didn't follow up, but 2 weeks later, he there in the house, he said, well, what do you think, Bart, about that conversation we had? Do you think you believed? And I said, well, yeah, I think I actually did. I actually prayed that Christ would come into my life, and I feel like there's something different about me. He said, well, I kind of wondered, and so that was my beginning. And I did tell you about the year in Guam. I don't know how much you want to know about that before I actually got on track as a Christian.
Okay. Well, before we get there, let's hear the beginning of your story in your spiritual journey.
Did you grow up in a Christian home?
No, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. It was a normal middle-class American home. We did go to a denominational church at times, usually on Easter morning. We did have a Bible in the house, but it was never read. We never prayed at meals. We never talked about spiritual things. Not one relative ever mentioned God. I had no Christian friends, or at least they didn't tell me if they were. And so I basically, I did in high school, went to this denominational church a few times, and I felt bored. I tried to follow the message, and then I tried to follow the prayer, and my mind would wander, and I just thought, I don't have what it takes to be religious, and forget this. And then I went off to the University of Oregon, and I went to church one time, and I was so put off that I thought, I have better things I can do on Sunday morning. And I just put it all out of my mind. And during this time, I was considered, I think, a nice kid. I was a good student. I thought I was a nice kid. But I had done some things, made some choices that I was pretty ashamed about, and really choices that had affected my life. And then I ended up in an engagement, and I say ended up because I really didn't want it, but this fellow asked me at a restaurant in front of everybody, and everyone was cheering and happy, and it was like, okay. And so
say no.
took the ring off the cake and put it on my finger, and then I spent the next, my parents were very unhappy, but I didn't feel free to talk to them about it. And so I spent the next few months trying to figure out, what is love? Can I marry just as a friend? And I couldn't find, nobody had any answers. And so in this day, I felt like basically I'd ruined my life.
Wow.
And I thought, well, if I move to another city where nobody knows me, then I can reinvent myself. And then I thought, but I know who I am. I know what I've done. And this burden, it was just a heavy burden on me. I was miserable, and I felt alone and desperate and pretty sad. So in that state, I was 20. I was a junior in college. I went to the dorm room of a friend to study for our final exam in English literature. And we studied the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. And in the poem, as we were discussing it, how he was so unhappy and how everybody was so nice, and they'd go out for coffee or for tea and talk, and everyone had this expression of themselves that was content, but inside just dying. The reality of life was totally different, and he felt life was superficial. And I was thinking, oh, this is me. This is me. Yeah. And this gal, this friend, she didn't know anything about me or my engagement or anything. And so I was thinking, oh my, D.S. Eliot is describing me. And then she said, out of nowhere, she said, well, you know, Pam, life doesn't have to be superficial. There is a God, the creator of the universe, but he's a personal God. He's not just out there, he's personal. And he sent his son, Jesus, to earth to die on the cross to pay for your sins. And he is offering you a new life, a new beginning.
Wow.
And that was the first time I think I ever heard those words. And my heart was just pounding. But I didn't say anything to her because it was like, wow, this is interesting. But as I left her room, I thought, I think this is true. And I felt a joy inside that I had never felt before. It was overwhelming. And immediately I I changed, my perspective changed, and it was like, there is a right and a wrong. And this was within that night and the next day, and I corrected some things that weren't right. And I thought, well, now I know how to choose. And that week in finals, it even helped me because I had, for once, a perspective on life to be able to answer questions in these books we were reading and discussing. And so, but I had no idea really what had happened to me. And I didn't tell her. Diane didn't know.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
And I think specifically how she said, he can make your life new. He can start your life over. That's exactly what you were needing. That's what your thought was. I need to escape and start over. And her direct message to you was, no, let him start your life over.
And that is exactly what happened. I thought, who can offer you a change in life like this? Who can take away what is wrong and give you a new beginning? And I felt like I was flying. I was so filled with joy that this actually existed, that it was so wonderful. And I had really no idea what I had believed in or that it was in the Bible or anything.
Oh, wow. Wow. Hello, listeners. If you're hearing the stories from the Pillettes and thinking, I want to pray for people like that, then the Missionary Prayer Handbook from CMML is exactly what you need. Inside these pages, you'll find a listing of hundreds of missionaries commended from local churches across the United States and Canada, complete with their contact information and a brief description of what they're doing on the field. This isn't a coffee table book. It's an invaluable resource to be used, not merely displayed. Something you keep on your nightstand, your kitchen table, your desk, as a daily reminder to pray for missionaries around the world. Join the movement that is advancing the gospel globally through prayer. Get your copy of the handbook at cmml.us/podcast and tap on Get the Missionary Prayer Handbook.
Would you say, with those backstories in mind, that the way you came to Christ and through whom you came to Christ has impacted the way that you, in turn, share the gospel? And if so, how?
Yeah, well, in my case, I mean, it's hard to figure out all the things that happen in your past, and in particular, becoming a believer. But I've always been impressed by the fact that this fellow who talked to me wasn't a pastor, or he wasn't trained to kind of hear this is how it goes and these are the exact things that you need to know. But he, in his own words, said something, and I didn't need to understand everything. It was sufficient just that he talked to me about Christ and gave me the basic idea of who Christ was and what he had done for me, and that he was offering me personally a change of life, forgiveness for sins, and eternal life, which, I mean, even eternal life, I don't know that I understood that concept, but the idea was it's supernatural. And so, yeah, that has affected the way I deal with people and the way I talk to people about Christ, that a lot of times I felt like when I went to Bible school sometimes, now to give the gospel is this, and that it kind of bound me up instead of just say it. Just get it out. It doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just say something about Christ and what he's done for you. And so, yeah, that has affected the way I talk to people, try in a very personal, conversational way to give them the truth about Christ, and try to avoid as much as I can terminology they may not understand, and realize that if they're going to believe, they don't need a ton of information, like in my case. And I didn't need to necessarily be in an ambient where, like music and, I don't know, a great eloquent preaching or whatever, that it was the truth, and someone taking the time just to come, and he probably had no idea what I mean, what was my future, or how open I was, or anything, but he just took the step. So I try to always encourage even other people that I talk to, you don't have to be someone different than you are. Just spit it out. Just tell them what you're thinking about Christ.
That's amazing. One simple conversation in a college dorm, and everything changes.
Yeah.
All of your background, all of your child rearing, everything that your parents,
Yeah.
said as this is reality, and God just pierces through
Yes.
one conversation.
And I do think that does affect people's willingness to share the gospel, as they paralyze themselves with thinking, well, I don't know exactly, or I don't know all the verses to connect to each and every point, and so I'm just not going to say anything because I don't feel like I'm capable. And that is so important to just to speak what the Lord puts on your heart, because we have the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit guides what you are communicating. And so if you really trust him and trust the Spirit to help you do that, who knows what kind of impact you can have. And I remember hearing a story when I was young that really impacted me, where it was, a prominent businessman, encountered a young boy who had Down syndrome. And this boy would repeat John 3:16 over to him, over and over and over again. He said, I got visibly frustrated with this young boy saying, I hear you, okay, knock it off.
Yeah, that's good.
And he just kept with a big smile on his face, saying, for God so loved the world. And he said, I went home that night and I could not get that verse out of my head, and eventually led to him coming to the Lord. So allowing God to use your limited way, whether it be the way you communicate or what you know, he can accomplish great things.
Yeah.
Pam, how about you? Has that affected your...
I think so. Because I think both of us come from families that were not religious, we're not drawn to religiosity and really don't have anything to offer that way, because we didn't grow up in a church, so we don't know all the things that are acceptable to do. But people need love, and it seems like that's sort of our mantra is love and the truth, and that the Lord uses that. I don't know, he uses what you can offer.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So let's move forward a little bit. Okay, so you were missionaries in Mexico for 15 years. Now, I know it's probably hard to summarize 15 years in one podcast, but would love to hear some of the lessons God has taught you, or God taught you in those 15 years of ministry there.
Well, probably, one of the things that has impressed me in later years is just that all along, after becoming a believer and then schooling and getting to Mexico, was that there were steps that were, I guess I would like to say, in one sense, I feel like, I don't know what the right word, spoiled. Kind of like he had mercy on me, because we're slow starters. We start out of the gate slowly and unaware of the Christian world and missions and missionaries. And so there, even getting to Mexico, the whole thing of another language, the thing to see that God, like my motive was to teach. And it wasn't really necessarily church planting, but how, first of all, I wasn't interested in missions, but he got me interested in missions. And then where? Well, all right, he got me to Mexico through numerous circumstances. And then in Mexico, developing just not a very, what's the word, kind of a satisfying experience at the school. It was okay, but I was drawn to being more involved in new works. And so then God opened the door by having one of the missionaries have a heart attack, and so I drove 4 hours to fill his spot on the weekend, leave Friday right after classes and go with my family, our 2 little kids, and drive up there and get out and meet people, some unbelievers and a few evangelistic studies and Sunday, and getting together with them. Well, after 6 months of doing that, that missionary then said, well, you're doing a great job. I don't want to come back and interfere. Well, I was like, well, that wasn't the plan. But so then we moved there. And so what I'm saying is that one of the things that learning is to not feel that everything has to be set, everything to fit so that you feel comfortable doing what you're doing, that just responding to the things that are before you, not knowing the future, because I didn't know my plan. I didn't know, like even seminary, I didn't know why I went. I went just to study the Bible. I didn't go thinking I want to be a pastor or a missionary. I want to know the Bible because I hadn't been in a church. Right. And so in Mexico, the same thing. Being one of the things was learning to trust God, that He was moving me more and more into that area of evangelism. And I don't consider, we're always saying we don't fit the what ought to be the missionary. We don't sing and we don't play an instrument, and
you're not the prototype missionary.
Yeah, and we have missionaries that we met. They're just so talented. They're so capable, and the music. I love the music. It moves people, and I can't do that. And I see men and women that sing, and they just have a way about them. Thinking, and so that's another thing about being used. It isn't always kind of what you plan. Mm-hmm. You don't have to have it all planned out, and you basically respond to the things that you're being led to do, and then a door is closed and another one is opened. And so that's why I say spoiled, in the sense that we're forced into, nicely, but forced into doing things that weren't in the plan, or what we would say was our cup of tea.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of the body. The fact that I love that picture that is used, because showing, it's so easy to want to be the more prominent member, and to have the music capabilities, and to have the background that feels more obvious of a missionary that we envision, but that as a body we're all working together to accomplish the same goal, and that we're even called to honor those less prominent members of the body because of what they bring to the table. And so that's such an important picture to keep in mind, that no matter where we are, what our role is, we all have the same goal and the same mission to accomplish, which is what you guys are doing. Pam, did you have the same desire to go to Mexico specifically?
No, I didn't.
No.
Confession time.
I'm more of, if you've ever read the book, Little Much Afraid by Hannah Hurnard, that's me. I'm fearful. And so I actually prayed for 2 years that God would change Bard's mind, and He didn't.
About missions, about going
missions,
to be a missionary.
Because Bard wanted to be a missionary, and we had a ministry there in Texas, and was like, oh, this is good, and Lord, please change him. And then one day after our second child was born, he said, I think it's time to go. And I'm going, okay, Lord, you didn't answer my prayers. You never answer my prayers. Oh, okay, change me. And so, and I was shaking like a leaf. And so I decided, the verse that came to my mind is, I am His helper. And so if I'm His helper, I cannot say no. And so it was like, well, you're going to have to do a work in me. So that basically was it. And I started out, I was terrified. And I knew it was going to be hard to learn another culture and to learn another language. And I had 2 little kids in diapers still. And So we started out for Costa Rica, and I think in one sense we think alike, and we love doing the same thing in our involvement with people. But it's just the actual functioning of it, as a woman, I don't think I was very good. There were a lot of gals there in language school that were really ordered, and this seemed to have it all together, and I just felt like I was running to catch up and trying to keep my house in order and learn another language. And so in Mexico, there were times when at first I would hide basically behind the fact that I was a mother. I was with kids and just let Bard do things. And I felt safe. But one day I thought, I want to be used by the Lord as well. So if he's going to use me, I'm going to have to step out here. I'm going to have to do something. And so that was the beginning. And I feel like you learn Spanish, and so I understood the words that people were saying, but I didn't get really what they meant by what they were expressing. And I think it took around 4 years where it finally clicked. It was like, okay, I know the culture, I know who they are, and I feel what they're feeling. And so it made a difference about teaching, because I would be responsible to lead the women, and I did not feel like I was prepared for that. But I mean, you have to do what you have to do. And so God taught me along, and people were patient with me. And so anyway, but I agree. Little by little, God moved us into things. I know, I don't know if there's time for this, but when we were at Puebla Seminary, where he was teaching, they had a school in English for the missionary kids. And I thought, well, if I have to be a missionary, at least my kids have a school in English. I felt safe. Well, then we started traveling up to Querétaro. By this time, we had 3 kids. You forgot. And we had 3, and one was a baby. And I loved what we were doing. I loved the people. And I was thinking, oh my, I'd be willing to move up here. But I didn't say anything to him. Well, he was thinking the same thing. And then one drive, like midnight, was we were going home, he said, well, I'm thinking about maybe moving up there. And I said, really? I am too. And he said, you're kidding. I I'm interested in it. That's how we work together.
Yeah, that's great.
You're a team.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Bart, what drew you to minister to the Hispanic people? And what about that culture?
Yeah, well, I wish I had a really deep spiritual answer for that. I really don't, in one sense. It was just one thing. There was a message that was given at the assembly we were at in Texas when I was going to school there. And the message was on Romans 15, and it talked about how many people, it's not real spiritual in one sense, but he was talking about Paul and talking there about how many English-speaking people receive English-speaking instruction compared to the rest of the world, and gave figures and whatnot, and that was just one of those things that God, a simple thing that wasn't real deep, but triggered a thought in me that I went home because she, I don't remember if she wasn't well or she was in caring for the kids during that time. I don't remember, and we discussed it. Well, that was the beginning of thinking about that. The second step was my sister and her husband, who did know Spanish, wanted to be missionaries from the beginning. He was a student at Dallas, and So that then was another step that was used. We didn't know anything about, well, where in the world do you go? Well, they were thinking of Spain, actually, and that's where we were headed originally. But then my sister got sick with a number of things, and they totally backed off. They couldn't go, and we decided to move forward when I received an invitation through connections to consider teaching at Puebla Bible Seminary. And so once again, this was just like God spoiling me a little bit, because it was, well, that was more comfortable. I know how to teach somewhat. That I felt that was more my gift, was teaching. Than I'm not a great evangelist. I talk to people about Christ, but that isn't something I just, just like falling off a log. It took work. And so one thing moved to another, and so that's why we ended up then in Mexico.
Okay.
And so the desire, the plan, someone presenting, this is the work there, please come, that really wasn't how it worked.
We wanted to go, we wanted to do something where there was a need. And in Dallas, it was full of people who could teach the Bible. We wanted to go where you had a place, a need to be.
Yeah. And as I had said, at times, we were at McKinney Bible Chapel, and they took me on full time as a Bible teacher, not as an elder. I was still youngish, and the work was going. It was new and just starting, just a few families, and it was growing, and it got to 80 people or whatever. So everything was fine. And we were happy there, but there was, because I had already earlier talked about going into missions, and the elders had asked me to promise to give at least 2 years before we left, and that was a great experience. But it's just how God intervened, and just one day I've got, in this Dallas area, I've got 100 guys that could do this job better than me. And I want to go where maybe there's not much competition, not as many people flocking to. I'm putting that in rather rough language, but the idea is where maybe there's a greater need.
Yeah.
And so that prompted then Spanish and the Hispanic culture was just step after step to get us there.
Gotcha.
Does God ever provide more than we ask? Sometimes we come to the Lord with a very specific request, trusting He'll simply meet the need. But every now and then He reminds us that His resources are far greater than our expectations. One of our missionaries learned that lesson in a way they would never forget. Before they were married, this missionary and his future wife made 2 commitments. First, that they would never go into debt, believing the principle of Romans 13:8, owe no one anything except to love one another. And secondly, they agreed that they would make their needs known only to the Lord. They wanted to learn to recognize God's voice and His provision without trying to persuade others to meet their needs. Years later, while serving, those convictions were put to the test. Their premature baby depended on a special formula. Their monthly support was only about $125 at that time. In 1 month, they simply ran out of money. Only a few packages of formula remained. They could have borrowed money. They could have written letters asking for help. Instead, they prayed. A few days later, the telephone rang. A man named Rudy, whom they'd only met once a year earlier at a conference in Germany, asked if he could stop by. "When would you like to come?" the missionary asked. "I'm only about an hour away," Rudy replied. Soon an 18-wheeler pulled into their driveway. With a smile, Rudy said, "Half of this truck is for you." The first pallet contained baby formula and baby food. The second contained diapers and children's clothing. The missionary's wife began to cry, and Rudy gently asked, "Why are you crying?" She replied, "I only asked God for 1 box." Rudy smiled and said, "You never know how big God's boxes are." It took them more than 6 months to give away everything the Lord had provided. Paul reminds us in Ephesians 3, "Now to Him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us. Our God is able to do far more than we ask or imagine. Sometimes we pray for one box, and He sends half a truck. Philippians 4:19, and my God shall supply all your need according to His riches and glory by Christ Jesus. As you know, the question is never whether He will provide, but how He might choose to do so. And sometimes He sends a truck. May we be found faithful in prayer, generous in giving, and ready to serve in His mission wherever He sends.
So you went where you were needed.
Yeah.
In Mexico.
Yeah.
Is there a story or a couple stories that you think exemplifies your ministry there during those 15 years? Is there something that stands out?
Well, yeah, the one thing that I see a lot of times, once again, God intervening to open doors. No great strategy, but in San Luis Potosí there, the work was slow. We were starting from zero there. We didn't know anyone again. That was hard. That was our first, step where we actually had nothing. And it took it. There were doubts like, maybe I've bit off more than I can chew here. I don't see things coming together. Well, we finally had a few contacts, and we began a small work in our home. And a lot of our works were started in our home. But one of the two couples that were related to each other, we had studies with them, and they came to believe. Rodrigo was the one who then showed great change and was talking to his relatives about the change of life, and he was asking forgiveness and trying to straighten out all the things that were wrong. He came from a very immoral group of family. Without going into detail, there's a lot of bad things, superstition and prostitution, the whole thing. Well, he was a construction worker, and he'd only been a believer about 5 months when he fell off of in a construction site, and a rebar went right through his neck.
Oh my!
And but he was still alive, and he was in the hospital, and we were there, and the relatives would show up, and sometimes they were drunk, and it's just everything's chaotic, and it's like there's no way there's not a book on how to handle these things. And so we're in a stairwell because they didn't have a waiting room, and
At the hospital.
Wow.
at the hospital. And well, for one part is that I was talking to them in the stairwell, the relatives. About 10 of them maybe were there, 15, I don't remember it. But there were other people there while their relatives were in the
Intensive care.
intensive care. And most of intensive care usually means you die there. That's kind of the way it is. And they were listening, sitting on the stairs and listening to me talk to these relatives. And as it turned out, some of the relatives didn't respond there, but then these people
Some of the people in the crowd
who were listening off to the side afterwards came up and said, I really liked what you had to say. Could you come and give us a Bible study? And so we did afterwards. But ultimately, Rodrigo did die. And so then they bring a busload of his fellow workers. That's the way they do it in Mexico. You get at least the afternoon off. They go to the cemetery, and it's dusty, and there's just mounds of dirt here and there. And I get on a mound of dirt, and hoping I'm not offending anyone by being on the grave of their relative, and open up his Bible where he had written, I believed in Christ, and he gave the date, and it was 5 months earlier. Gave a short message. And also I had all of his workers, I don't remember, there were 30, some of them there, plus the relatives, who were very against everything we were doing. Very rude, actually, to us. And after that, the dad, who was, the patriarch, said to me the very next day, he came to me and said, from now on, I want the Bible taught in my home. Well, see, those are, doors that open that they're hard to, you can't manufacture that. We want kind of to have outreach. We want to, let's have, walk in the park and hand out, tracts. And those are kind of the normal ways, but these are ways that I find, they all showed up then at our house the very next Sunday. And I was just packed in there. They all, because the dad said we're going, and so everyone
They had
showed
all
up.
been antagonistic until that message at the gravesite, and then everything turned.
Everything turned.
Wow.
And many of them came to believe. And so that's just another kind of like, well, I haven't been taught how to do this, but these are things that is like, well, you just get up there and do what you can. And you might offend someone by standing on their grave, but things aren't like in the States. It isn't all nice and clean and everything, hidden. It's just in your face. And so those are the things that I felt many times in our work in Mexico were used that were key to changing people's hearts. Besides being, our normal way was inviting people to our home for a meal and being invited to birthday parties and whatnot, and then just casually conversing with people. And they would then show interest, and we would work with what we would call evangelistic Bible studies. It would last only maybe 30 minutes.
Wow. So I'm getting this picture that that Bart and Pam didn't go to Mexico with a grand strategy, like this whole background of Christian influence and godly living and, the whole Sunday school curriculum that we put our kids through. But they're just like taking a step at a time and going through doors that God opens and, not going through doors that God closes and taking risks and taking opportunities and seeing what goes from there.
Yeah. Organic comes to mind.
Yeah.
Sounds like you've led a very organic ministry as far as just when a need arises, you're there and ministering to people right where they're at and when they need it. And then, how cool that people that were just listening not even necessarily the people you were speaking with heard it and then opened that door. But being willing, that's really the key, that you went there willing to serve, and who can know how God can use
and that old guy lived. He was
came out.
He lived, and he was baptized.
The father?
The one that was the one that was in intensive care along with Rodrigo, and his wife heard Bard speaking and invited us to study with her. He lived, and Rodrigo died.
Wow.
He lived. He was 70 something, and then was baptized, and it was faithful until he actually did pass away. And so, and just one other little thing, I feel like it's not so much for us like, oh, we're ministering to these people. I feel like these people are our friends, and I love them, and I think they love us, and we just want to give our lives to them and encourage them along the way. So it's more organic.
I love that. And the way you see how Christ lived while he was here for those 3 years and ministered, that's really much of what he did was there were needs, he would meet them. And when people's needs have been met, there really is a much more openness to hear the spiritual need, how to fill that need that they have. And it sounds like that's much of what you're doing. And Bard, you have studied the Apostle Paul's leadership style. Joel had mentioned that you had written an article about this. And how has Paul's methodology impacted the way that you do ministry?
Okay, well, there's a little bit of a backdrop to that. I like to study probably too much, but that furlough time, the mission we were with was encouraging me to work on a doctorate, and while our daughter was being analyzed, what all does she have wrong with her? And
You had a daughter that was born with some challenges.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Slow learner but other physical disabilities. But they didn't know how far she would get. They didn't really know. That was stressful for us both. And then me with the doctoral program, I was in the Greek program. And after the first semester, there was almost like a spiritual crisis in one sense. I'm overwhelmed with these books and the liberal, unbelieving authors, and this is all part of this program. And I'm all the other guys were teachers in other countries or there in the States. I was like a fish out of water, and I felt burdened, and you probably are wondering where am I going with this, but I just felt this, it's like I'm working with people who, they're not interested in all this, and I'm getting this is killing me. And so that's what led then to this work on Paul. Well, what did Paul do? And so when it came time for the dissertation, I was determined to do something that would feed me. And I changed my area. I changed from Greek to Bible exposition. But anyway, I chose this. How did he deal with his fellow workers? What gave him respect? What made him have powerful influence? And so it was as a result of that then I wrote about this, and I spent a lot of time on it, and I had already had enough experience in mission work and even being a director over Mexico, all the missionary families in Mexico, and so I'd been in that. And one of the things that just grabbed me was his way. It was personable. He names people that he's worked with. And he feels for them. It isn't just a job. It's and he sacrifices, and he's on the move. And church planting the way I was, you got to be on the move, and it's hard on the family, and but also how he worked with people, treating them and not using titles that distinguished him from his fellow workers. That there was a way of, but no one questioned his authority because of who he was, and so part of it was this coming to a place where people would assume his decision was the best. They would give him the benefit of the doubt if there wasn't really maybe agreement, but the idea was that by staying to some degree in the hard part of the work, that he had a lot of respect. Now, there was some knowledge of him beforehand, but not really, and he would begin to work with the Gentiles and non-Jews, and it's like, well, they weren't asking him, well, what school did you go to? What do you know? Who are you? And I found that refreshing to think, well, it was depending on the Holy Spirit to use him, and he even used his testimony at times. Now, of course, that was more in the synagogues, but that was encouraging to me that, well, when you move on, no one, we work with people from the ranchos, none of them ever asked me, well, what are your studies? Who are you? Yeah. It's all about, well, am I genuine? Am I sincere? Do I go to their homes and act like I'm at home in their home? Or all that about Paul, numerous other things, really had a big effect on me. They pulled together thoughts for me that to kind of keep it simple and to not get involved in doctoral programs and to and to be, to be personable and to love people that are not your station in life. And part of that then led me, even when we returned to the States, we, because of a number of circumstances, I ended up deciding that we would keep our children in our home as we had in Mexico, and we would have a meeting in Spanish in our home, so that we would keep ourselves tied to Spanish and the Mexican culture, and invite people to our home for like a family devotion at home. And of course, some people would come and, this is church. I mean, this doesn't look like church. So there was an opposite response sometimes, but the idea that to keep it simple, to keep to reach out to people as we had before, and so those things. Yeah, the study kind of, I learned things, but it gave me conviction to say I need to keep doing the hard work.
Yeah.
And I need to keep.
It means no retirement.
That's right. That's right. Got to keep going.
Yeah.
What I love about this is Bard started out like as a missionary in academics, like teaching in a seminary, and then he discovers that he really enjoys talking and sharing the gospel with the common people, visiting people in their homes, going to the ranchos, which are villages, communities that are connected by family, extended family, and then he comes back for a doctoral program. You'd think he'd end up more of an academician, and he actually, the example of Paul sends him the other way. Like, let's do more personable. Let's work with a team. Let's get down to earth. And
Yes.
so I love that.
And I think it's interesting that Paul's backstory is godless. You know, he was very religious, but he didn't have a personal relationship with Christ. And after his conversion, you know, another thing which is important for you two is knowing your audience. He knew even when he was on the move, he knew who he was speaking to, and he changed his method of approach based on who his audience was.
Yeah.
And
That reminds me. The last time I heard Bard in Mexico, I can't remember the year, but it was a series on First Peter, and there are lots of illustrations, stories about life and ministry that you were adding to the message that deeply connected with the Mexican audience, the people, where they're at, and there are meaningful connections, meaningful illustrations, but also they were true to the text, to the meaning of the text. It was evident that it went hand in hand with the exegetical work. How important is it for you to connect culturally to the people when you speak?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, you've said it. It is living with people at where they live, and yeah. And so illustrations just come to you, and people do here in the States where we work with people from the ranchos. They just right away is like, oh, well, you're more Mexican than we are. It always seems odd, humorous, but yeah, they'll say that it kind of brings back memories, and
Or they capture the truth of the scripture because of something directly from their culture that they identify. They're earthy. They work the land. They love animals, and so they laugh, and it's like it clicks in their head, the truth.
And I think it helped. I was going to comment. I think it helps to some degree, because of all the academic background. I mean, I went to college, and I I was in seminary a total of 9 years in all. It's just crazy. But to be able to say, well, during that time I supported myself in concrete work and lumber mill, washing cars, working for Hertz, rent a car, washing, changing oil, and working in the woods, cutting down trees, so that I was always, that sort of is helpful, like, no, I'm not just, with a silver spoon in my mouth. I do understand hard work, because they do appreciate, it's hard work. When they come to the States, they would I just want to work. That's all I want. I want to work. I want to make a living. And but the thing that is helpful now is that like in a lot of my teaching, I use drawings. I'm not an artist, but I draw anyway. I give it an attempt. And they'll always laugh because I capture, having lived all those things and been in the ranchos and the things that they say. I'll use pictures, illustration, and I still teach with a Blackboard. I'm not a PowerPoint guy, and so that all draws people in. They feel at home. It's like, well, yeah, this is my life.
That's great.
Well, you've alluded a couple times to ministering to Mexicans in the USA, which makes me very glad we have another episode coming up to really kind of flesh out what that looks like here in the States, ministering to the same people, the same culture here in the United States. So we're so excited to talk about that in our next episode. But thank you so much for speaking with us today, and the encouragement that I got, I know Joel got, because he was mmming many times.
Love the stories.
But we are, to me, just the encouragement to be present, to be where the need is, and to not overthink, and to be Christ's hands and feet wherever you're at. And you will be blown away by what the Lord will do and the fruit that will come from that. So take that and run with that, audience, and look forward to our next episode, To the Ends of the Earth, a CMML podcast. Thanks for listening.